2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
.43, let's have a look at some of the papers this morning. And HS2 could be back on track, says the Sunday Express, as the West Midlands Mayor Andy Street and Greater Manchester Mayor Andy Burnham team up with private enterprise.
In the Telegraph, government crack on activists in the civil service. Diversity networks will be reviewed in an efficiency drive.
A third of children are in danger as they aren't fully vaccinated against the measles, says the Sunday Times.
And video footage has emerged of post office chiefs enjoying a lavish company bash as they were fighting wrongly jailed sub-postmasters in court. The Mirror says bosses, including Paula Venables, were filmed singing along to guest star Pixie Lott.
And the Sunday People says Prince Harry and Meghan have sent a message of support to the King and the Princess of Wales over their health scares. Though some of the papers are saying
exactly the opposite.
Exactly the opposite to that one. I should think they will have sent messages to.
I would hope so.
Let's talk to author and broadcaster Nikki Hodgson and editor of Spike, Tom Slater. Good morning, you two.
Good morning.
The government's cracking down on activists in the civil service, Tom, according to the Sunday Telegraph.
Yeah, so as ever with the sort of Tory war on woke, what it actually amounts to is not very much. So in this case, they're talking about cracking down on these kind of diversity classes, schemes, etc., which have been taking place. In the small print of it is that they want to stop them taking place during the workday, so you've got to have them at lunchtime or after work. So it's not doesn't set the heart racing as much as you would see. This is a genuine problem as far as taxpayers' money being spent on, you know, allyship training, white privilege sessions and so on. It's a ridiculous waste of money. I mean, it's not going to save a hell of a lot in the grand scheme of things, but I think you can understand why people would think this is ridiculous.
I thought most of the civil service was still working from home anyway.
Well, you can do these things on Zoom, it turns out. That's actually how a lot of this has come out, is because people have been able to get, you know, just capture the video and send it to someone at the Telegraph or elsewhere, and so a lot of this has come through. I think the much deeper problem the civil service have is, and this has been, there's been many stories to this effect, is to the extent where this is going beyond the training. You know, you've actually got civil servants who, when certain controversial policies come up, when the Tories want to push through, say, single-sex bathrooms in government buildings, as happened with Kemi Badenoch, they find their briefs come back from civil servants, red pen, say, you can't do this, you can't do that. So it's a much deeper problem than are the schemes taking up taxpayer money and too much civil servants' time. But as ever with the Tories, they like to huff and puff a lot about these things without necessarily doing that much about it, I think.
I did unconscious bias training with an employer over Zoom. It was the biggest waste of time.
Because it's basically just about treating people with respect, being fair, isn't it?
Yeah.
This story is really interesting, though, because I agree with Tom. It's one of those things that's kind of a lot of huff and puff and not much substance to it. I guess thinking about the intake, though, of civil servants in the next years to come, this is why they've started to do it. Because, you know, they've got to become more diverse if they want to attract different people into the system that are going to help, you know, help people be more inclusive in politics. So I understand that element. But, yeah, like Tom says, just moving it to the people that are committed to it will, of course, go in on a breakfast to go do it. I mean, it's just very silly.
Yeah. And I actually tend to think it has the opposite effect as far as I think when you've got a diverse workplace, I think people can bump along pretty well. Younger generations are more integrated ethnically, racially, religiously and whatnot. I think it can often send people in the other direction. I think it's often just it's a sort of thing which burnishes people, makes the facilitator or the head of department feel good about themselves, but doesn't do much beyond that.
Yeah, that's right, we love this story in the Sunday Express, Nikki. HS2, the northern leg, could be back, but privately funded, which begs the question, if this is doable, why didn't they do this in the first place?
This is amazing. I was very happy to see this, obviously being a northerner that's very passionate about HS2. So basically what has been happening is the West Midlands Conservative Mayor, Andy Street, and the Greater Manchester Mayor, Andy Burnham, who's Labour, they've come together and they've made a plan to get private investment to get it back on track. And it's all been kind of done secretly. I wonder why, because it makes Rishi Sunak look pretty terrible. Also, considering his constituency is in Yorkshire, you know? I mean, it really was disappointing that he shelved it. It really proves that he doesn't understand the North at all.
But they're having a meeting, I think, with the Transport Secretary now in Whitehall.
Yes, they are.
And they're going to lay out the plan, and you just wonder how is it going to work? Do we know any detail?
Well, what we know is it's based on schemes that have already run in France and Hong Kong about how they use private investment to fund these kinds of projects. The leader of the project will be Sir David Higgins, and he's the former chairman of HS2, so he's obviously very passionate about it. Keir Starmer is obviously very much on board with it, although he has warned that there will still need to be an element of taxpayer money involved.
Yeah, we just don't know how much.
We just don't know how much, exactly. But what's really nice about this story is it proves that people on either side of the political spectrum can work together and do something for people for a change, you know?
Yes, but of course there will be those who are unhappy at the idea that, you know, it's going to be ploughing through their constituencies.
Yeah, and that's, of course, why some Tory MPs, you know, don't like it. But
the land is already bought,
but that's the interesting thing, Anne, because apparently the land is bought, but it's potentially about to go back up for sales. They've got a little short time where they've got to get rid of that, otherwise that would turn the plan completely
that would be why
down.
they're having this meeting now.
Exactly, they have to do it now.
They find large swathes have been bought up by one Rishi Sunak.
Exactly.
Oh, fascinating.
It is.
All right, let's have a look at the Mail on Sunday. Do we call this election bribery or do we call this inspired thinking by Jeremy Hunt?
Depends what way you look at it, I suppose. I mean, Jeremy Hunt has not been known for his inspired thinking whilst he's been in post. But yes, this is, as you've already been talking about on the show this morning, this pledge for tax cuts, talks of a Nigel Lawson-style big bang in order to get the Tories somewhere towards actually scraping the next election. I do wonder how much this is actually going to cut through with people. There was a JL Partners poll about a week ago looking at Tory voters people who voted Tory in 2019. What would encourage them to vote for the Tory party again? And number 1 was small boats, number 2 was the NHS, 3 the economy, 4 inflation, and 5 cuts to income tax. So I think it tells you something about how low down the priorities are.
I don't know, if people had actually had the prospect of voting for 5p off their income tax, whatever it would be, it's be very difficult to vote against it.
I suppose that's the argument. I suppose the other thing is, if depending on how these things align, I mean, if we've got a budget in March, if they go for a later election, could people start to feel the benefits, and therefore that might make them think twice? But I think it just does show desperate times call for desperate measures. But it is a bit difficult for the Tories to pose as this low-tax party when they have been presiding over the highest tax burden since the Second World War.
Yeah. It's too little too late, I think, for people. I don't think the electorate is stupid. They'll know exactly what this is. It is a bribe for, for them to vote for them. And also, he's been very woolly about the details. So he hasn't really floated which tax will be cut. He said maybe income tax, maybe national insurance. Obviously, the Tories want to go for national insurance because it promotes people being at work. And then there's always the issue of inheritance tax. It's kind of being dangled again. Maybe we'll make a cut. So the devil's in the detail, and he hasn't put any detail.
And how would Labour respond as well in the atmosphere of an election? What would they say to this?
Well, that's the key question here as well, because obviously they don't want to be charged with being kind of reckless with the finances. They tended to more or less mirror what the Conservatives are doing on a lot of these issues, to be clear. And on occasion even trying to attack them from the right for having the high tax burden and so on. Yeah. But I think Labour, even more so the Tories, where the economy is concerned, are trying to operate as a kind of constructive ambiguity. We're not going to scare the horses, but what are we going to do? Question mark. That's kind of how they've been operating at the moment.
Yeah. Well, we'll just have to wait and see. March 6th, isn't it? Can I have a look at this? Just fascinates me, Nikki. Ambulances are now going eco-friendly, according to the Mail on Sunday, but there are some issues.
Well, look, I love a green policy. I am pro-greening cars and vehicles and all the rest of it. But somebody has made a very silly mistake, and they've issued these eco-friendly ambulances, but lots of NHS workers are too tall or have feet too big to drive them. So they've made the most basic error of not thinking about who's going to be working in these vehicles. And actually, it's a bit more than that. That's kind of the silly angle of it. But actually, they also have less room for paramedics to stand by a patient's side, which can be critical if someone's having cardiac arrest or something.
Oh, well, you think so?
Exactly.
Where have they bought them from, then?
Well, I don't know. Apparently, it's a very cheap deal. So it's, again, Tories doing something on the cheap. If they spent a bit more, they could have... The old Mercedes vehicles are actually better to use, apparently. But the other thing that I do think is quite interesting about it is that, there's this discussion about women and vehicles now, about how women fit in cars and the safety of seatbelts. Basically, cars have always been designed for men. And they never cared about that, but they do care about people having size 12 feet and not being able to drive, so...
Excuse me. Well, but I'll tell you what, we are headed... What frustrates me about this is, as you will all know, young people are taller than ever,
absolutely.
bigger feet than ever,
Yeah.
all the rest of it. So any young paramedic, particularly a male, obviously, is going to have a real issue.
I just wonder who designed them.
Yeah, it's just so basic to make that error and not think about the measurements of the drivers.
Yes.
Yeah. What needs to be done about women drivers then?
Well, there's a lot of research to say that seat belts and position of cars and position of seats are all basically too big for women, and they're not. You can't.
Seatbelts are the most uncomfortable thing for women.
Exactly, it just doesn't work.
They're all in the wrong place.
Yeah,
but you can move them at the side.
but
then it doesn't work.
Not enough.
Oh,
I mean, and when
Nowhere
you're
near
pregnant,
enough.
you can't get. There's just no point.
And also,
almost.
it's the headrest thing as well. That's always in the wrong place. It's too high, or it's
Absolutely.
desperately uncomfortable. You fail to see. In fact, I think it would break your neck rather than help your neck.
Yes, absolutely, and that's what they
But the
found.
seatbelt, even if you move the thing down, it's still too high.
Yeah.
And it cuts across your cheek, and it's just
Basically,
Have you not
they're
been
safe.
using your booster seat?
well, that's the only thing you can think of now. And then it's very difficult actually with short legs to move so that it's comfortable to be able to reach the pedals still. You are
It is
so
a real
tall,
problem,
you don't
Stephen.
even get it. You don't even get it, but I promise you, I'm sure most women watching will agree, it's desperately uncomfortable driving
It
a
is,
car.
and it's dangerous. That's the bottom line. So, that... But thankfully, people are now looking at
I always
these
think,
things,
because the seatbelt's sort of coming across there, I always think if I had to suddenly brake now, or if I crashed into something, I'd lose my head.
Yeah, but what's the alternative? I don't get what the alternative is.
Well,
it's having women's cars.
No, it's not
one of
about
these-
that
get
at
one of
all.
these ambulances.
It's just having things that adjust to different measurements. That's all it is.
Most seats do, though,
but
don't
not at the range that is required.
No, absolutely.
It's a very simple solution, but nobody's bothered to do it yet. But we are talking about it now.
Yeah. It's funny. I do apologise. I shouldn't laugh. This is something that... Did this ever occur to you, Tom?
It's never occurred to me.
But
that's part of the problem, I suppose.
All the design factories and everything, they use crash dummies, which are male crash dummies.
Absolutely.
They are tall, they are big, and they don't have boobs.
Absolutely.
Or pregnant tummies.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
So this is my issue.
Crash dummies are male. I think they're beginning to bring in smaller female ones, but most of them are male.
Yeah, it's not been the norm.
Right.
There you go.
Well, I'm all for female crash dummies. Want to be a crash test dummy?
Yeah.
And fine. Lovely. Just on the tax cuts things we talked about, loads of people have been in touch on this one. Stephen from Leicestershire says the Tories have failed to fulfil their previous promises. Why should we believe any further promises about tax cuts post-election? I guess the issue with that would be it would have to be in the manifesto, and therefore it's very difficult to break.
It is.
Well, it's not impossible.
Well, that's been done before.
Well, it has, but it would be up for the high jump.
It has, but I think you touched on quite an important point, which is on the economy, on tax, on the small boats. It's not that... I think people have just tuned the Conservatives out now, because it's been...
Well, Betty from Highcliffe says, why do chancellors believe that a tax cut here or there would really make a difference to the outcome of an election? The electorate are fed up with the fragmented Tories, but God help us if Labour get in.
Oh, that's a cheery...
Well, don't you think that's how a lot of people might be
It's going to be a
feeling?
really negative election campaign, that's for sure, because neither of them have got a positive story to tell, even on the Labour side.
And a very low voter turnout, I suspect, as well.
There is going to be a lot of people who just won't know where to put the X, I think. Look, thank you both. We'll see you a little bit later on. In the meantime, let's check on that very windy weather with Craig.